Hello everyone and welcome to my studio again. Today I'm painting silver pitch and pears. So I chose a simple subject, but at the same time it's not very simple because some people find painting metals a little bit difficult, but only in the beginning. But if you forget that it's metal and you just remember a few little tips that I hope to mention here, you'll be able to paint it the same as any other object. And I also chose two pears to go with it, so you could see some reflections. So my silver picture is a little bit old, and I just deliberately didn't wipe it, didn't clean it. So it has some dark kind of tarnish in it, and also has some light reflections in it. And I set it up on the white lighter material and with some a little bit darker background. And pears I chose two different types. One is green and one is yellow, more yellow, so to show different shades. So the silver picture, I call it silver, maybe it's not even silver, but it's kind of in that it's not gold or it's not copper, so it's more in like silver type of metals family, if you can say it. So I'm starting with the same paints. I will talk about my paints that I'm using. So normally it's the same list that you would see in the comments in this video. So I'm starting with my darkest darks, and it's I think it was a mixture of ultramarine blue and alizarin, and I even added a little bit of black. So I'm trying to observe the darkest areas of this metal, and normally you can even go a little darker than you see it, because it's easier to go from dark to light than other way around. So I used the same panel I would normally use for most of my demos. It's primed panel. I prime it with oil primer that I buy from Gamblin, and I find it's a very smooth surface. Sometimes it's actually too smooth, so it doesn't have any grip on it, like for example linen, but I like the surface for still lifes, for flowers. The paint doesn't go very deep in that surface and it just sits on it. And of course it's much better than any kind of cotton canvas or something, where I would think that canvas just drinks the paint and it just goes into it. Sometimes it's good to have highly absorbent surface, but not as like for me I would prefer either linen or this kind of smooth panel, but for demos I mostly use these ones. Sometimes what I find on this surface though, it kind of, if you use bristle or some other stronger brushes, it just picks up the paint. So your brush has to be soft enough, but at the same time has enough spring and tension in it to paint on this type of surface. So anyway, so I advanced in my picture right now. So I'm start going in more gray area, and again I'm using ultramarine blue. I combine it in some areas. I added a little bit more white now, and I also used in the mixture transparent red oxide with ultramarine blue, so it kind of creates dark but not very black. Mixture. So I'm just trying to observe, and you can see that my lightest light somewhere in the middle where the light falls. So for now I'm working around my mid-tone values. I identified the darkest darks, and now I'm adding more of the gray ones, and I will be adding reflections later, but at this point I want just to see my mid and dark values. So I started adding a little bit of tabletop. So having tabletop now will allow me also to see reflections and how tabletop and picture interact with each other, because metal is a very highly reflective surface, so both background and foreground and pears that next to picture, they all reflect into that metal. It's almost like a mirror, but not quite. I think my picture, because it has some distortions on it, it doesn't reflect exactly as clear as mirror, so it's a little bit softer. Sometimes it's a little bit darker. It's almost like similar to glass, but not quite the same. So I continue working on my tabletop, and it looks like I started on background as well. And sorry if you see my easel shaking. It's actually because my table that I have my palette on is close to my easel, and sometimes when I mix the paints it moves it. So my background is gray. So from what I remember when I was painting it, I started it from slightly purpley, but then I changed it to more neutral. I tried to make it dull, so the duller background will go into the back, because it's a more kind of atmosphere at the back of my painting. It's not in the forefront. And the picture and the pears should come forward. So for that purpose, doing background a duller color. In most cases, it's kind of, especially in the beginning when you're practicing different still life setups, helps. You know, if you make your background duller, then it definitely will be at the back. It almost works the same way as with the landscapes, for example. If you do a landscape and you know that there is atmosphere in the air, and normally like mountains, forests, or whatever it is in the back is going to be a little bit purplish or bluish, and color is not as bright as color in front. So the same way with still life, the colors that closer to us are brighter, have more saturation, more intense, and the colors that recede in the background duller and have some atmosphere in them. Maybe not as much as in the landscape, but as an artist we can always adjust this and see which background will make your subject to pop up and which background will start overpowering the subject. So to avoid overpowering the subject, you can always adjust your background. Like sometimes I paint background and I think, oh, I made it too bright. So once I start dulling it, I can see how it affects my subject. So I think in this case I started my background maybe a little bit too purple, but I'm going to adjust it later. So I continue painting picture now again. So I'm trying to put some lighter brush strokes in the area where the light falls the most, and that's where highlight is going to be as well. So I'm trying to make soft brush strokes on it. So now I'm doing the back of the picture, the inside actually. It has kind of dark edge, and then it has some light falling on the inside of it. So when I want to show the form, I need to make sure I notice those little things, because this way the picture will not look flat, it will look like a three-dimensional object. This is actually the first video where I'm trying voice over when I paint it, and I'm recording as I see what I'm doing. I'm not sure if this is going to work better, because it looks like I have started losing my voice. Excuse me. Started talking more than actually I expected. In comparison, when I paint, I don't have really that much time to talk, because I have to paint as well. So hopefully this one will work, and I probably will try to do different options. Sometimes I would do voiceover, sometimes I would paint and talk, but there are pros and cons for both. Like when you paint, it's sometimes difficult to talk, because you really have to focus, especially the first half an hour of your painting. So you could put the tonal values right, the colors and everything else. So talking really is very difficult at that point. But when you do voiceover, you may forget some things you've done already, so you really have to do voiceover pretty fast while it's fresh in your memory. Excuse me. So I'm not used to talk a lot for a long time, so hopefully I can last through this video. I think it was about 57 minutes or so. So what I'm starting to do now, I'm trying to add some reflections. So I see some yellow undertones, I see some reflections from pear, but these reflections still, even though it's almost like in a mirror, they're not very strong. They should overpower the actual subject color and brightness and saturation. So I'm testing those very carefully. I'm putting a stroke and then I see how it looks. Does it look too bright or too dark or too light? And then I'm continue working on the tabletop. I want to make it lighter, because then when the light is in front of the subject and the light in highlight, they kind of align, they bring more attention to the main subject. So now I'm starting to do background around pears. And I kind of paint around with background. Sometimes it's easier to do the shape of the object with background, the actual drawing, because sometimes when you do drawing first time, there might be not quite correct drawing, and as you go you notice new things. The more you look at it, the more you start noticing things. Oh, I did that wrong, or I didn't do that right. And normally I put a very schematic drawing. Drawing is not my strongest, and I don't enjoy drawing as much as painting. So even though I should paint, or I should draw more to improve it, but I still enjoy painting and actually moving oil paint better than draw. But sometimes they say that actually strong drawing holds your whole painting. So that's why in the beginning I try to spend time to get my drawing as correct as possible. So my purple color in the background, and I thought to start from that it will be complementary to yellow-green pears, but then as I started painting, I thought I will make it more like dull and not as chromatic as I thought originally, because bright purple really, even though it complements yellow and green, still not the right color for the something that you want to recede. So I think I added more black and yellow ochre to it later. So the preliminary underpainting I did with transparent red oxide. It was my preliminary underpainting. It's kind of warm and transparent color that I stained with Gamsol, and then I wiped the lightest areas. So it kind of sets, it's normally like 3 value type drawing and underpainting that helps you to see where the darkest darks, where the lightest lights, and where the mid value. I guess this is to simplify. Of course, there are lots of different mid-tones and changes, but as long as you get the 3 values right, that's already a good start, and then you can see how far you can go, how much you can add different mid values. Sometimes the changes within those ranges become very subtle, so some artists really like to work on those and push it further. Some artists like great contrast, so it depends. And the other thing to see all those changes and values comes with the experience. For me, I'm still working on it. I still don't sometimes think I see all the values quite well and right, so that's why painting as often as possible is a good exercise. And for seeing values better, it's recommended everywhere to squint. Like if you read book Alla Prima by Richard Schmid, where he mentions how important is squinting. So that's why most artists probably have lots of wrinkles, because they squint a lot, but that does help. And I know that artists who don't have good eyesight, for them it's easy because they don't need to squint, they just take off their glasses. But for me, it's squinting, and sometimes I even put myself a note to squint, because once you get excited about the subject and painting, you forget about squinting. And this is really, really important, especially in the beginning when you set up the tonal settings for your whole painting. So at this point, I start adding some highlights at the base of the picture, and also trying to redefine drawing a little. So the right part of the base is in the shadow and the left one is in the light. And that's where I see 2 highlights at the base. So I keep working on I took a softer brush, I think it's a rosemary coma. So I'm trying to add more darks in the shadow part. I think I lost some of those, because once you lose your darks in the shadow, you start losing the actual how the form looks. So sometimes adding reflected light makes you do this. Sometimes you just go too light, too fast in mid values. So still working with the same colors, so I think I may have added a little bit of kind of maybe orange or yellow. Maybe it was a yellow ochre or cad yellow dip, a little bit as a reflection from the pear. And the lighter mid-tones, I think they're more like a dull purple, not very bright purple, but still ultramarine alizarin, and a little bit of yellow ochre, and maybe some black and some white, depending on like where I put it. So right now in the back of the picture, on the back side wall. I'm adding a little bit more light. There are some visible highlights on the handle as well, so I'm correcting my drawing, keep working on the drawing for the handle. And normally I would go back and forth. I would work on one area and then I switch to the other area and then I go back to that area, because you always look and compare. You change one area and then you see you need to change the other area, so it's kind of back and forth job all the time. And sometimes when your eyes get tired from one subject, you can work on the other subject and then you switch back again. So now I'm moving into pears. So again, the same with picture, I'm starting from the shadow parts, just to make sure I get the shadow correct. And also my pears overlapping, so one pear is in front of the other, so I make sure I also have that cast shadow that the first pear casts on the second pear. First I'm going a little bit maybe darker than I need to. I just want to make sure I have the shadow parts correct. And pears, interesting because it has like a ball and kind of conus shape on top of it. But these two pears were very interesting. They're not a very like classic shape type. The top part wasn't very pronounced, like the round part was more obvious, but the top of the pear wasn't. So I remember I was trying to get the right shape of that part for a while, but before I got to try it. So, and one pear is, I laid it down, and the other pear is standing at the back of it. So I don't know, I hope you can see it quite well, or at least you can, probably not quite well, but you can see it in the video. So for pear I was using cadmium yellow deep and cadmium yellow light. And for shadow, I will say first, for shadow I was using transparent red oxide, and then I added a little bit of cad yellow deep, and maybe I think I was added even cad red to make it a little warmer. So the shadows of these pears, I had cool light, so the shadows of the pears are warm, and highlight on the pears was quite cool. So I think my highlight was white with cadmium lemon, white and just tiny bit of touch of cadmium lemon on this first pear that was yellow. So the main thing was to identify that mid value where transition happens between the shadow and the light. So I think I changed it quite a few times because I kept losing my shadow and wasn't quite happy with the way it looked until I got it right. So that's what I remember. But for now I'm just doing the shadow and cast shadow under the pear. And of course, because my material, the tabletop, is light, it has some reflection in the pear. Pear is not highly reflective object, but nonetheless you can see like a light falling in there. The main thing again, as with all reflected lights, not to overdo it, because it shouldn't be brighter than the, or as bright as the surface that reflects in it. So I continue working on this pear shadow and start going into the mid range as well. And the brush I'm using at this point is a synthetic filbert rosemary. I can't remember what number it is. Oh no, actually I can see it's not synthetic filbert. I'm actually working with the comb because it's a softer brush, and the good thing with this comb, it's so soft and nice that it's easy to lay paint on top of the other paint. It creates quite interesting effects. So you can see I'm adding more warm color to the shadow part. And in the light I'm adding cool yellow. I think I was using cadmium lemon and cadmium yellow light, and was adding even some touch of green, possibly viridian. And now I'll put a little bit of reflected light in the shadow as well. Yes, I'm trying to emphasize, highlight a little bit more, kind of building a lighter area under it first, because that's where the light hits the most. And then I put highlight. Sometimes I do highlight with palette knife, but recently I kind of started doing it more with brushes, because I feel like palette knife puts a very thick highlight, and on like under natural light highlights are not as strong, and sometimes, especially on fruits, they're more diffused. So I find that brush works better for it. If it's on the like picture or glass, I might use palette knife for it. But highlight is not always just white. Sometimes you can add a tiny bit of, depending on like which object and what kind of light you have. So if it's a cool highlight, definitely you add either blue, purple, maybe like viridian, just tiny bit of touch to give it a little bit of color, or like in this case it was cadmium lemon. If it's a warmer highlight and you have warm light, then definitely some kind of warm yellow would work, just a touch, because mostly it will be like white with touch of any other color. So in the meantime I started working on the green pear. So green pear had a very cool green color to it, and especially in the cooler light it looked even cooler. Like my highlight looked at some point even almost blue, but I think I finished with adding a touch of viridian into that highlight. So again, trying to make sure don't lose my shadow part, and don't use my cast shadow from the other pear as well. So I kind of boldly put that highlight. I remember I changed it a little, because I thought it was too bright actually. So I'm mixing cool green. I think it might be viridian and some yellow added to it, cadmium yellow light. So I'm putting highlight on the tip of the pear as well, because normally it's like a little stalk and it has dark and light to it. I'm going to do the same little tip for the other pear, but I remember I was changing it later. So I think after I laid down all the values and colors, I started refining and then looking more in pears, how can I improve the shape. So I worked on cast shadows on this cloth where I had them. So cast shadow normally is not as defined and not as contrasting as the object, so normally it is it has soft edges. So for cast shadow on this material, I think I was using ultramarine blue and transparent red oxide, and I think I added some white to make it a little lighter. So now I'm working on the tabletop again, trying to cover around my shadows, and because it's horizontal, so it gets more light than vertical plane. So I think for the brightest spot on the cloth, I'm using white with a little bit of either yellow ochre, or sometimes I add cadmium yellow deep, just a little touch, so that makes this white much warmer. But because I have background and all other subjects, so it's not going to be all the same color. So tabletop normally would have warm and cool accents in it, the same as every object. You have warm and cool, and that's what makes it interesting. Always try to find warm and cool in every object you paint. And the other thing, if you want to emphasize one color, so if you know that it's a complementary color, you can put next to it, and this way it brings up the color you want to bring up and emphasize. So continue defining the drawing with help of tabletop color. Still using the same brush. Normally I would use brushes. I like brushes with long handles, but unfortunately this one I made a little mistake. When I ordered brushes, I chose the wrong handle, so for me it took a while to get used to these brushes, because these brushes were not cheap. So I thought I'm going to use these brushes even with this short handle, so they work okay for smaller paintings, especially like for detail. So I'm using titanium white, and I guess a little bit cooler color in it, like blue or purple, dull purple, just to paint around cast shadow. And also at the back, the background and tabletop, that the border where they meet, I'm trying to keep it soft, because again it's just to create the idea of atmosphere in the background, just to make sure that we know that pears and picture is much closer to us than the back of the table. So I continue working on tabletop, like I said, variations of cool and warm, but as the base color is white, and then I attach either cooler color or warmer color. And the picture and pears, they're getting light from the window, and the light from the window is cool, plus it's a blue sky that also gives that kind of cooler light. I also have artificial light that's also cool, so when not enough light from the window, sometimes I put that artificial cool light, and it helps to emphasize like highlight, or if it's getting dark. So now I'm adding that little bit grayish cool color on that side, that closer to the window. Maybe it's too dark and too brown. Obviously I had something on my brush. So I'm starting to work on background again, and I think even when I still work on like very dark, I think I added black to that, but I remember that even when I finished the video, I think I changed background a little and make it more duller, because sometimes you need to walk away from painting and then come back. Sometimes even next day is better, you can see so many different things again. Normally I paint my painting alla prima, but at some point I know that I start overworking it, so I leave it and come next day and just fix few little things I find, look at it again, and then it's done. I still consider it alla prima, but it just second fresh eye always helps. Sometimes, depending what I paint, like if I paint a pet portrait, I'm having even a third look at it, because you want to make sure it looks right, and especially when you do pet commission, you make sure it looks similar to what you painted, because clients accept similarities on what you paint. So now I started painting metal again. So obviously I looked after painted pears, and I thought it has some warm yellow pear accents in it, and some from background, and plus I started defining more the drawing of the picture itself. So I'm looking for little reflections on the edge, in the corner where the actual spout of the pictures. Then I'm doing highlight. So you can see that highlight brings, there were little highlights, but normally as long as you put the main highlight, the small highlights don't matter that much, you don't have even. So I thought, no, I need to bring more highlights, and I think I will paint over them again. Sometimes less is better. Especially in painting. Like they say, better leave unfinished painting and 20% underdone than, I can't remember how many percent overdone. That's interesting decision that every artist have to make every time you need to call your painting done. And I find that underworking is better than overworking for me, because sometimes you start fixing things and then you make it worse than it was. I learned it from my experience so many times. So now for some reason I decided to make it brighter, the reflection. And I think it's too bright. Looking at it now, I think I'm going to change it again later. So I decided to work on this pear again. What I decided to do to make the neutral transition zone of the pear more neutral and add more dark color to it. I started correcting the shape of the pear. I decided to redo it a little. That's what I was talking about before. Decided to fix this pear. Because I was looking at it and I was thinking the shape of this pear doesn't look right to me. So I decided if I add this neutral transition mid-value, that should help me to define the shape better. That's what I'm doing now. And normally just adding a little bit of purple in that transition area helps, because it's kind of local dull color of the object. Transition between dark and light that every object has, and sometimes that's actually the less colorous part of the object. And sometimes those neutrals, mid-values, actually help to keep the shape of the object. So I'm dulling my reflected light again because I thought it's too bright, and painting overcast shadow again, and the shadow of the second pear. So if you're interested in still life, and if you want to know more or to see more of my updates on what I'm doing, you can also subscribe to my community. I have the link in the comments, and also you can check my Instagram and Facebook pages where I post most of my still life. I don't do videos for everything. I only do videos for some paintings I paint, but I'm trying to paint regularly, if not every day, maybe every other day. And I like to paint flowers a lot. Now it's winter and have to focus on fruit a little more, but I started already my first spring flowers in February, yellow tulips. And I also paint landscapes, but of course flowers and still life is my favorite subject, and then landscapes. Sometimes I get inspired in winter and I paint one winter landscape, and then I kind of satisfied my craving, I go back to flowers and still life. Or in summer I do plein air. I'm not sure if I'll do any videos on plein air, but I may try to do this summer when it gets warmer. Don't like outside in winter to paint, so I normally make lots of photos, go for a walk, and try to remember the colors and light, and then come home and paint straight away. In winter, in summer I do little sketches, and I also like paint animals. I do pet commissions, pet portraits for dogs and cats. But I still feel like in still life and flowers I have so much freedom when I paint. Not as much as when you do commission. So I've decided to make color a little brighter, and highlight is not as light on that second pair. So I'm adding more like a cooler green. I think it's green with addition of some white in it. I put reflected light back that I took off before. I think I'm going to adjust the tip of the pear as well, the little stalk. So I added more reflected light in the first pair. Just keep working on that transition. I guess I tried to observe it with more attention just to see how I can improve the shape a little better. And I also decided to decided to paint the light that I see behind the second pair, and you can tell how it brought it kind of up, because that lighter material the light falls at the back there, and it's kind of warmer light because it's further away from the source of light, cool source of light. At the same time, I try to keep it soft, the edge of the tabletop and the beginning of the background. The dark purple material that I had there. So now I'm trying to smooth background a little, just so the brush strokes will be very subtle there. Don't want to make very active brush strokes in the background so they wouldn't overpower the texture of my objects in front. Normally I would add more texture on the light in the foreground and make it smoother and dull in the background. So I'm working on the picture again to make sure the edge is done correctly in terms of drawing. Like I said, you notice something different. The more you look at the object, the more you start kind of seeing things that you didn't see before. And other way around, you stop seeing things that you've been looking at for a long time. So it has benefits and it has downsides as well. So I think painting a metal object is the same as the object, requires a lot of observing and trying to kind of forget that it's metal object. Just when you lay down first, you know that it's a reflective object, but forget to start from at least just to put the right values and colors correctly. And then you just look for the main reflections. It may reflect lots of different things, but you just can choose and pick what looks nice. You don't have to paint to make it busy with different reflections, because then it will not look natural. So I'm working on the second pair again. Obviously I noticed something on that pear that I need to make it brighter, even more brighter than I did before. But I think I'm already approaching the finish of my painting. I'm close. Keep working on that pear as well. Like I said, you go back and forth, so I'm going back and forth right now, kind of trying to put finishing touches that I think in my mind finishing touches on the pear. I don't like to achieve photographical resemblance. That's not the way my style is, and I don't like that, so I prefer just to enjoy moving the oil paint and try to do the brush strokes. Ideally I would like to use as little as possible. So at this point I'm finishing, and you can see the final painting on my Instagram or Facebook page. And thank you for watching, and I hope I could do some better videos in future. And see you next time. Bye.